but I couldn't even. Uzbar b'archava. So we're learning Likkutei Sichot volume 2, Parashat Shoftim. Uzbar b'archava shechodesh Elul hu inyan shel arei miklat. So we've already talked about the fact that month of Elul is about cities of sanctuary for those people who either murdered or manslaughtered until their judgment is passed. It is? הוספה לכך, לגבי העניין של שופטים ושוטרים, נאמר בספרי שהיו שופטים ושוטרים בכל מושבותיכם לרבות בחוץ לארץ. יכול נאמר בספרי, אף ערי מקלט היו בחוץ לארץ. אמור לומר, אלה. ערי מקלט היו רק בארץ ישראל. So, in relation to that, the Sifrei, the Medrash Halacha, for Bamidbar Dvarim, says that the pasuk says you should appoint judges and how would you say shotrim? Officers. Let's call it officers of the court. Magistrates. Which really, people think that shoter today is like a cop, but really it means an officer of the court. In all your dwellings, your places of dwelling. So this includes Chutz La'aretz. Wherever you live, you should appoint the court and an officer of the court. So the Sifrei says, Yechol af arei miklat hayu b'chutz la'aretz, amud lomar eile. So he says, could it be that, according to this, that the city sanctuaries were also in Chutz La'aretz? So it says no. Eile ha'arim. It says these are the cities that you should appoint, you should designate as cities of sanctuary. So all the cities of sanctuary were only in the land of Israel. למרות זאת נאמר בספרי שגם רוצח שבחוץ לארץ קולטות ערי המקלט, אלא שהן עצמן היו אך ורק בארץ ישראל. Still, there is some connection to Chutz La'aretz. There is some connection to outside the land of Israel. And that is that even if the person committed the act of either manslaughter or murder outside the land of Israel, the cities of sanctuary within the land of Israel would open themselves to him. He'd be able to dwell there. מן העובדה שהספרי מצרף שופטים ושוטרים לערי מקלט, שמאחר ששופטים ושוטרים ישנם בחוץ לארץ, היה מקום לחשוב שגם ערי מקלט היו בחוץ לארץ, יש להוכיח שלערי מקלט יש קשר לשופטים ושוטרים. So he says, one thing that we get out of this is that since the Sifrei thought that we can learn from שופטים ושוטרים about ערי מקלט, בכל מושבותיכם, you might think that we could learn that just as there are judges and officers of the court in all our places of dwelling, even in Chutz La'aretz, even outside the land of Israel, and from that we could learn that there are also cities of sanctuary outside the land of Israel. So since the Sifrei brought this as a Hava Amina, this is a possibility, we learn that there is a connection between the cities of sanctuary and Shoftim v'Shotrim, and the officers of the court and the court. עניינם של השופטים. So what's the connection? עניינם של השופטים ואפילו של השוטרים שהיו רודים לא היה לשם עונש, והמטרה הייתה רק שבאמצעותם יבוא זיכוך. So it says the Rebbe, a big principle, that we're not into punishing people. We don't punish people for the sake of punishment. That's what I started with. Then when you look at the world, you don't understand a lot of times why is it that a person suffers something specific? How in the world is this going to make him a better person?
Other times?
Most of the time. 99% of the time. You don't see the connection. So there you can say, I don't know how God runs the world. But by yourself, when it comes to you, you can't say that same thing. You can't say, my goal is just to punish. Because there's like an idea that people have. You can punish for the sake of serving as an example. Okay? Here he says, that when real judges and real officers of the court punish a person, it's not for the punishment, but rather to bring about a change in them, a refinement. כך עניינם של ערי המקלט, גלות מכפרת. The same thing is true about these cities of sanctuary. We don't just send someone to one of these cities away from his home, away from his family, let's say he just committed manslaughter. So we don't do this to punish him. We do this in order for the exile, for the person's exile, to atone for him, to put him in to change him. פירוש כפרה, על פי מה שמסביר אדמו"ר הזקן באיגרת התשובה, הוא מלשון קינוח. One of the meanings of the word kapara, of atonement, is, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Igeras HaTshuva, that it means cleaning. It's like using something to wipe and clean. יש כאן קינוח והסרת החטא במידה כזו שהאדם נעשה מרוצה כמו קודם החטא. And what that means is that the person is now beloved the way that he was before he sinned. In other words, Hashem loves the person anyway, all the time. He always wants him, but the love is in such a way that he wants him to lead a good life. When he doesn't lead a good life, so he's stained, he's soiled in some way. So he can't come into the king. He can't come before Hashem the way that he did before he sinned. So the kapara, the atonement, whatever causes the atonement, it could be the punishment, it could be the exile, whatever form of retribution it is meant to make him able to enter the presence of the king just as he was before the sin. לפיכך יש אפשרות לטעות ולסבור שהוא גם בחוץ לארץ, שער ארץ ישראל, שארץ סתם נאמר למה נקרא שמה ארץ, שרצה לעשות רצון קונה. So the Rebbe here gives a big principle. The fact that we call the earth comes from the word will. So the earth wants to do God's will. What does that mean? It means that the earth is such a place, the earth was created in such a way that it is conducive, it fosters the possibility of performing God's will. You can't perform God's will not in the earth. For instance, where would you not be on the earth? What? No. So when you're first a fetus and you're in your mother's womb, so in the womb you can't perform God's will. You have to come out into the land. It's called entering the land. When you are in the space that we call earth, whether you're on the surface, you're 10 miles up, you're 1,000 miles up, doesn't matter. In any case, this space, again, this is a spiritual space, it allows you to perform God's will, which cannot be done somewhere else. These are things that a person cannot do somewhere else. So again, the somewhere else means like you're not in the state of being a human being the way you are now. And that is true regardless of where you are on earth. You could perform God's will in the land of Israel, and you can perform God's will outside the land of Israel. It could be either or. משמעות חוץ לארץ היא מחוץ לרצון. So theoretically, I would have thought, I could have thought that outside of the, when you call it chutz la'aretz, you're saying this is outside the land of Israel. Outside the land would mean outside the earth. So somehow, if you're outside the earth, you can't perform the will.
יעקב, אפשר להפעיל את המזגן? מאוד מאוד חשוב. אפשר להפעיל את המזגן? חם פה, חם. אי אפשר לנשום.
So why was it called earth? Again, because it wanted to do the will. If you call the land of Israel earth, so you're saying that only here you can do the will. Again, you could have thought that way. ולכן יש צורך לנקוט זהירות יתרה על ארץ ישראל. למרות זאת, היו רק שופטים ושוטרים, ואילו ערי מקלט בארץ ישראל בלבד. Still, the connection here is to tell you that even though this type of atonement didn't exist outside the land of Israel, of the cities of sanctuary, the officers of the court and the court did exist everywhere, meaning that everywhere is a place where you can do God's will, where you're supposed to do God's will. Okay? So that's a very important point. It really is that way, that people thought, this was the thinking that people had when the first exile happened, when they went to Babylon, that from now on we don't need to keep Torah and mitzvos, because we're not in the land. The Torah and mitzvos were for Eretz Yisrael.
But they kept Torah and mitzvos in the mitzvah.
Again, but you could say there was a hora'at sha'ah. It was from Moshe Rabbeinu telling them that you need to keep now. And also we see that the way that they kept the Torah and mitzvos in the Midbar was a little bit different. Why was it a little bit different? Because they were not yet obligated by most of what they had heard. Why did they think they weren't obligated? Because a lot of things were dependent on the land of Israel. So they understood that at some level, what we're doing now is like a preparation. So once we went in the land of Israel, then, and that's also the meaning of Moshe Rabbeinu's will to go into the land of Israel, because he wanted to perform the Torah and mitzvah. So people understood from that it doesn't just mean the mitzvahs atliyot ba'aretz, not just the mitzvahs that are dependent on the land. That he really wanted to. It's like that only in the land of Israel is this complete. So to take out of that meaning, out of that understanding, so Shoftim has to be everywhere. And there's a connection, obviously, between the cities of sanctuary and the Shoftim Shoftim.
Some of the Yer Miklot weren't in Eretz Yisrael anyway.
No, they were. All of them were.
No, the other three.
Ki Yerchiv Hashem et Gvurcha. Only when you've added. Yeah, but only when you've conquered these lands and you've added them, and there's a process by which.
You see that it is possible that the Miklot outside of Eretz Yisrael.
No, this is called Ki Yerchiv Hashem et Gvurcha. That Hashem expanded your borders, the borders of the land of Israel. It's not that you went and conquered something in Russia, and now you can make that into an Ir Miknat. That won't help. That doesn't help. You can go that far. If it happens to be that the Russians come and tell you, look, we've made a mess of our country, we want to organize it. Please come help us because you made such a good mess of yours, and make something out of ours. So you go there. You can't make Moscow into an Ir Miklat. Although it would help, right? But, okay. So leave it. Yeah.